This is a reading of an article that is titled The War on Drugs, Oxytocin, Cultural Marxism versus the West and Their Synthesis. This was posted anonymously, so I do not know the author, but I still think that a lot of really good ideas are expressed in here. However, I am also going to be giving my own comments as an aside. Hopefully it doesn't get too confusing. I'm going to try this out as a kind of reading as well as putting in my own 2 cents, and hopefully it doesn't get too confusing. So let's begin. Oxytocin, isn't that a prescription painkiller? No, you're thinking of oxycodone. Do you think just because you manufacture your own supply of a molecule in the core of your brain, that war can't be waged on it? It may not be formally declared, but a de facto war is already underway. First, a definition. Oxytocin is a peptide hormone produced in the hypothalamus, deep in our limbic system, that's the emotional center of the brain, which is near the brainstem. It is stored in and released from our pituitary gland, aka the master gland, as it's called. In clickbait science, it's called the cuddle hormone. More accurately, it's the hormone that's responsible for our feelings of bonding. It underpins many of our strongest and most noble instincts: love, friendship, trust, cooperation, basically a bunch of pro-social behaviors. It's also essential for optimism and healthy self-esteem. In addition to this, which he doesn't mention, it is important for having self-control as well, for being able to have a sort of emotional resilience to stress. That's actually a real important one. Being able to have resilience to stress and being able to delay gratification. So being able to consciously endure suffering because you have a sense of self-control that is built up. This resilience is built up from having a strong basis of safety, of a healthy, positive state that you know you're going to return to. And it's not something that you can just fool yourself into. You can't think yourself into a healthy social environment. You actually have to experience it. Oxytocin, as well as vasopressin, are both socially contextually dependent hormones. They're very important for our health, but they are completely contextualized. You will not release these hormones just by thinking really hard on your own. You need a positive social experience, and not just one or two. You need a consistent flow of this. This is something that really needs to be driven home through a lot of people. A lot of people in this day and age take positive social experience as if it is some, not necessarily frivolous, but it's an extravagance in a way. That is not true at all. You need positive social experience as the baseline. Having a healthy social environment, having a healthy sense of community and a healthy sense of belonging amongst other people is the baseline. Being isolated, being atomized from that, not having a connection to a community is inherently a negative state that causes stress for the brain, but it's ultimately causing brain damage over time. We'll perhaps get into that a little bit later. Back to the article. Oxytocin has a half-life of about 3 minutes in the blood, so its effects are very short-lasting, but it indicates a cascade of positive hormonal events that reinforce overall health and pro-social behavior. Its release is especially responsive to touch. A hug, a handshake, even a smile can evoke it. It's enmeshed in the intricate nonverbal dance that we all play, the largely subconscious symphony of communication that links all of humanity. Now, another aside for this, it's not just like a handshake with a random person that you meet. It's like actually having a sense of touch that you can trust the other person. It's not a douchey kind of hug. I don't want to say that, because there's a lot of, it's not a friend, I guess it is kind of like a friend zone hug, but there's a very negative culture surrounding touch, especially from men to women. Touch is constantly sexualized, and I blame the media for that. Guess who's behind the media with that portrayal? It's pretty obvious. It's Jews that are hypersexualizing everything. They're the ones that are in control of the media. On that idea of positive, just this social warmth from touch, that aspect of our culture is completely subverted by this over-sexualization thing. There's a sort of famous study that talks about healthy levels of oxytocin that are necessary for being able to fight against stress and being able to lower blood pressure, having all these positive health benefits, that if you have a 20-second hug, and I think it's supposed to be like a 20-second hug every day, like eating an apple a day, is like, that's the nutritional requirement. I'll reiterate that because I think that's pretty important. Having a 20-second hug, which that seems ridiculously long for anyone, in our current social context, where we're so deprived of just healthy, wholesome physical contact, where it's like, that seems really awkward. We live in a culture of hover hand and beta orbiter bullshit and really selfish women that do not reciprocate affection towards men. There's a lot of guys that are really trying hard to get female attention, but with access to social media and such, women can get so much attention without really having to work for it, and they don't have to work on their quality of character either, especially since we have, with pro-feminist culture, you can't criticize women without being called sexist, and women really need boundaries in order to find a harmony with behaving as they should for the greater social order. That's a little bit abstract, so I'm not going to go into that. The bottom line that I wanted to get at is the norm for physical contact, just for having a sense of warmth and healthiness, should be having a girlfriend, or ideally a wife, that you can hug every day for 20 seconds as this like parsed down, very basic, bare minimum that you need for mental health. And I think the absence of access to this very basic human warmth from one person to another, these stable relationships are such a rarity. I think that the absence of accessibility to this social warmth, to this physical warmth even, is why we see a lot of, bluntly, mental illness that's out there. Mental illness is running rampant, and this goes everywhere from suicidality to depression, anxiety, paranoia. We see that really on the rise because people don't have the necessary positive social context that helps us maintain our social health. We lack a sense of belonging. We lack people that we can rely on. We lack people that we can trust to be dedicated to us. That's a particularly big thing when it comes to marriage in this day and age, that a man really, really struggles to trust that a woman is going to stay with him and be dedicated with him, with the sort of air of society today that has men as such an evil entity in general because of feminism, but also because it's also very hard to rely on women to have any sense of dignity when they're not held responsible for their actions at all, because again, criticizing a woman in any way, shape, or form is seen as sexist. And I'm trying, but in perspective of how we put women up on a pedestal by default, this is going to seem very negative. From that perspective, I want you to reanalyze that assumption that you may have. I know that the person who I'm reading this for, that he already understands this, so I'm not trying to demean you. You know that we put women up on a pedestal because we want to protect and provide for women. That's a very natural masculine instinct, but at the same time, that's kind of being subverted to the point where we're not holding women responsible for their actions. That's really the sort of level that we need to be real with, that we need to hold women responsible for acting like whores. Oh, that's such a bold statement. There is a lot of just imbalance that has been allowed to come up because of just not being strict. So on to the next part of the article. Oxytocin is released greatest in its quantity during childbirth. It relieves pain and forges a lifelong bond between mother and child. It's also intimately involved in father-child bonding and other things like healing your wounds, sexual arousal and orgasm when it's released in copious amounts. When female rats are administered oxytocin antagonists, that means blocking the flow of oxytocin. When female rats are administered oxytocin antagonists after giving birth, they fail to exhibit the typical maternal behavior that would be expected of them. However, virgin female sheep under oxytocin show an instinctual maternal behavior even towards foreign lambs. That's something to keep in mind as well, that the maternal instinct that's going unmet by a lot of women not starting families, because there's a lot of push, again, from feminism, which, going back to the root source, it's not women that are pushing this bullcrap. It's ultimately Jews that are trying to convince women to believe in this culturally subversive subversive shit because it's ultimately trying to destroy our societies and tear families apart, making divide and conquer, making us easier to manipulate because we don't have the strong social bonds that help us to have a sense of discipline and a sense of connection to one another. Anyway, that maternal instinct that women have to have kids, to raise a family, is going unmet when there's lots of women that are in the workforce. One manifestation of a kind of sick maternal behavior is women projecting a sense of care ultimately towards non-whites, and it's a lot of white women, and a lot of it's old white women that are past their ability to have kids, that are big advocates and speakers for all of this amnesty bullshit, or bringing in the poor migrants, and it's just a misplaced maternal instinct. And the way that we fix that is you need to pressure women into having actual healthy relationships with men and actually starting families. How to go about that is another discussion entirely. Falling into traditional gender roles is seen as an extremely negative thing. Women being good mothers is portrayed as this evil, that you're falling in to this terrible system that's trying to oppress you and make you feel miserable, when women have a very strong instinct to be a mother, to take care of children, or to take care of something. And that is what really gives a sense of meaningfulness and reward. But that's being taken away by this sick cultural mindset that's saying if you're being a mother, then you're giving in to oppression because you're falling into traditional gender roles. That's bullshit. It's seen as socially acceptable to take care of non-whites instead, to advocate for faggots. Faggots can be white, but to advocate for faggots, or to advocate for migrants coming in to white countries and just flooding us like shit. And it's also important to remember that women are more sensitive to social pressure, so it's seen as not socially acceptable to be a mother and to start your family. There's a lot of anxiety that is purposefully brought up by the media, especially in like TV shows and in movies, where starting a family and becoming a parent is shown as if it is a terrible burden, as if it's something that's to be avoided. Oh, you better not get her pregnant because that's a disaster. Like, pregnancy is treated as if it's a terrible thing in most media, and that worms its way into a sort of raw anxiety about, oh, I have to have everything in line, everything in order. I have to get... Another thing that really pisses me off, I know I'm tying myself up here, but there's an idea that for a woman to be successful, she has to have a prestigious job, and then she can get married, and then she can start having kids. That's not going to happen. You can't have a job and be a good mother at the same time. I'm going to repeat that. Get it through your head. You can't be a mother and have a job at the same time. Choose one. One, if done on a widespread scale, will lead to the collapse of the population, and you're not going to have healthy kids at any sustainable rate. The other is how we have managed to have a healthy society, a healthy population, at least, for all of history. That's important to remember. Women being mothers, that traditional perspective is necessary in order to sustain a healthy number of people. Someone has to take care of the kids and make sure that the kids get the attention that they need. And that's a very noble thing. Motherhood should be seen as a very noble thing. But because of Jewish-led feminism, it is portrayed as something that's toxic and terrible. And it's such a strain to be a parent. You're so oppressed if you become a mother. Don't you want the carefree, child-free life where you can just be focused on your own consumerist bullshit forever? And it's really sickening.